Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast series here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. My guest tonight is the founder of Gamedev HQ, a company that specializes in teaching people coding and how to apply that to games. He has had an extensive background in the industry, and we're going to be having a very, I'm sure, interesting chat about game dev, coding, and more. So please welcome to the podcast, Jonathan Weinberger. How are you doing?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great introduction, Josh.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Happy to be here.
Yep, it is great to speak with you. I'm glad that your company reached out and was interested in coming on. I am always looking for guests for the series. I was just telling Jonathan, if you are a developer watching this and you want to talk game dev, your upcoming project, or anything else, please reach out because I can talk about game design until the cows come home. But it is great to speak with you on this lovely October. We're right in the middle, or we're about to be in Halloween.
We are in Halloween here.
Yeah.
Halloween time. I'm actually going to take my 9-month-old son. We're going our whole family's dressing up as up, and we're gonna take him trick or treating right after this. So
Nice.
really excited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do a horror themed podcast for a long time. It's just been hard to get guests on for that, but that's another really big topic of mine. I
got great connections in the horror genre. If you want, I'll send them to you after the show here. Because a good buddy of mine, Al Heck, actually runs. He builds horror games for game jams, and he actually had a few of them get played by Markiplier, which is really cool.
Nice. Yeah, and as soon as we're done with this conversation, I have a design video going up about horror, which I'm sure is going to scare people or just make them upset with me when I talk about my thoughts on horror design. So, for the people watching this, that will be for pass, for those of you enjoying this. So, it is great to have you on, and we certainly have a lot we can jump into. But to get things started, since this is your first time on, can you talk a little bit about kind of who you are and what is your background? And then we'll talk a little bit more about what Gamedev HQ is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a code school called Gamedev HQ, and what we do is we use game development as a gateway to software engineering. So when learning to code or get a career in tech, it can be really daunting, really terrifying on how to get started. And what we found is that it's more exciting to build video games and homing missiles. But the reality is everything you do to build a video game, the problem solving, the logic, it all applies seamlessly to the enterprise world. So while our students learn to build video games and do go on to work for big studios, like we have students, for example, who work at Blizzard and Jagex and things like that, they're also equipped to go work for the enterprise world, working at companies like AT&T and Coca-Cola and Apple and Google and things like that. So our bread and butter is basically just helping people learn to code by building video games.
And that's, I think, a very interesting point, because I've been giving a presentation to teens and students about kind of getting into the game industry, where skills can be applied and stuff like that. And for a long time, a lot of people have always assumed that kind of learning video games and game dev is very much insular to that industry. That if you're going to learn how to program games, that's it. You're not going to be able to apply those skills anywhere else. So it's good to hear that there is that kind of route for people, I guess, in terms of learning coding, and they can apply I guess that takes me to a really good question for you. In terms of what you're saying, what you teach, how do you bridge that gap between game dev and enterprise and other careers?
It actually goes even further than that. When it comes to gaming, there's a lot you can learn by building and even playing games sometimes. But we actually speak to a lot of schools, middle schools and high schools all across the country. And when we go to those schools, my favorite thing to go in there with is especially if they're 8th grade and up, because they've taken some algebra classes, maybe linear algebra. And I'll ask them, who's familiar with Pythagorean theorem? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And they'll all raise their hands. And the second question is, how many of you feel like it's the most useless function in existence? And once again, all of them raise their hands. And as a game developer, believe it or not, I use Pythagorean theorem every single day, because Pythagorean theorem is actually the distance formula in disguise. And so if I'm creating a zombie shooter game or an FPS, and I need to calculate the distance from myself and you so that I can chase you or target you, whatever I want to do, I have to use that formula to calculate that distance and get that vector so I know where to go. It's also the same way if you look at a game like Flappy Bird, right? If
Hmm.
everyone's played Flappy Bird, that projectile, that's actually called a parabola. And so math becomes really cool and exciting when you start building and coding video games because you start realizing, oh my God, I wish I would have paid more attention in school. But that's also the beauty of everything here. Myself, right? I'm completely self-taught. I failed math all throughout high school and college. And it wasn't until I got serious about coding video games where I recognized, oh, wish I paid more attention. But the beauty is you can learn this stuff again, and because you're more interested in how it's being applied, in my
Hmm.
case, by building video games, I retain it, and now I know how to use it. Homing missiles, those rotations, those actually use a lot of trigonometry, trigonometry from arctangent to cosine and sine, and you start realizing, wow, this is really cool to use math, and it's a good feeling. So
Hmm.
on that level, that's how we kind of use game development to educate. But then how we do it to take game development into other industries, like how do I learn to code video games and then end up working at Apple, for example? And that happens because of the phenomenon that occurred with game engine technologies. So today, whether you're using Unity or Unreal, every industry imaginable is using this technology, from film to automotive to architecture,
Hmm.
engineering, construction, medical, simulation, you name it. I can go on forever on this. Every single one of those industries is exploring how can I use real-time 3D, which is the exact same technology that video games are built on. And if you've watched any movie in the past 5 years, it was using Unity or Unreal to render it or to modify it in some way. The Mandalorian is filmed in Unreal Engine. The
Hmm.
entire MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe today, was built majority with Unity in the last few years. And so we have the ability now. If you ever seen Ready Player One, all those virtual scenes between the physical world and the in-game world, they were all rendered and shot in real time through the Unity game engine. And so, as a game developer that has a skill set with Unity, I can go work for an automotive company. We have students
Hmm.
that work for Jaguar and they do virtual reality production for Jaguar. That's an automotive company, but they learned everything they know by building video games because it was way more exciting than building some website or an app or Java applet or whatever universities traditionally send you through.
Hmm. Yeah. And as you said, like one of the biggest things that's really changed, like especially in the indie space for the last decade, was how much the public game engines have really grown and become very much more acceptable and more approachable. Again, like if we're talking game industry circa 1990, 2000s, you weren't getting access to an engine like Unity or Unreal unless you were at
No,
a yeah.
I remember Unreal Engine used to cost $1 million just to download it. You only could get a license if you were enrolled in a school that offered game development, which back then there was only like three. The top one was probably DigiPen, and it was like
Yep.
$100,000 to go there. It was ridiculous. And so Unity came on the market, and I think this was like 2000, 2009, maybe 2008. I think Unity became free. 2009, I think it became free. And their mission was to democratize game development, allow anyone with an idea to come
Yeah.
onto this and do this. And because of Unity, look at Unreal today. Unreal is majorly accessible. It's both
Yep.
engines are amazing. Both engines are free. And the indie scene exploded in 2010 because it was finally accessible to start doing things. And that's where we got games like Braid. We got
Hmm.
games like Flappy Bird and Temple Run, and these were juggernauts back in the day, and they're all made in Unity because it was
Yep.
finally accessible.
Yep, and now we have stuff like Godot. We have RPG Maker. Like there are more ways than ever to like actually get into the game industry, or even just like mess around with code. And as you said a minute ago, like it's far more exciting to learn coding if you're building like a mock platformer or a basic first-person shooter than I remember back in high school. You know, way back in the '90s, my programming was learn how to sort pricing in a supermarket.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Wow.
It's right. It's that's not as exciting as building your own first-person shooter game,
Hmm.
because we're all inspired by gaming. Some of us want to build an MMORPG, or you want to build an FPS, or you want to build a match 3 game. What's going to keep your attention? Building something that's not related to anything you actually want to build, or build something you want to build, get the actual skills, and then a movie theater company might say to you, "Hey, we're looking for a software developer to do some augmented reality stuff for us."
Hmm.
And now you're like, "Oh, wow, this is cool. I'll go work in that industry now."
Hmm.
Versus starting off building a database system for movies or whatever, it might just be not as exciting and
Yeah.
thrilling. Um, it's funny you mentioned something about Godot, by the way.
Hmm.
So Godot is an incredible open source platform today. It wasn't until very recently actually that their 2D tools really started rivaling Unity. And I don't know if you talked about in the past like Unity's PR nightmare from 2023 September. But long story short, that shot Godot definitely to the forefront. And their
Hmm.
tools today are very good. And what we focus on is career opportunities.
Hmm.
I think we're going to see the indie scene absolutely blow up amongst Godot. We've downloaded it, we've tried it, we've checked it out. It's very good. But from our employment side, we still see Unity and Unreal Engine. They're continuing to grow year over year and dominate the employment market.
Yeah, man, that was an interesting point because I was just talking to some students about that the other day. That like when you look at stuff like pure like game engine or even pure like sculpting tools like RPG Maker, Adventure Game Studio, Twine as another example, like that stuff is still very much I think inclusive to the industry. Like I'm sure you're not going to be hearing from Apple saying we need someone who knows RPG Maker to work on their next game, and I think that's always been like the trickiness of learning these different engines. So I guess to kind of put you on the spot for a second,
Right.
Jonathan, in terms of like when you're teaching people about different game engines, like do you prefer Unity? Do you prefer Unreal? Do you kind of like mix it up? Like where do you go?
Yeah. So I'm completely self-taught. I've been a
Hmm.
software engineer now for 17 years. I'm 32. I started when I was 16, and I am a Unity or die type person. I have downloaded and used Godot to try it out to see, we've explored, do we want to add this to our curriculum? Um, of course, we now have an Unreal pathway, and it was built by a brilliant developer named Joshua Kinney. Um, and I've also downloaded for the first time as of basically Unity's PR nightmare was the first time where I was like, okay, let me download Unreal Engine and give this thing a real shot. And because of Josh Kinney's course that we built, I've gotten further than I ever would have ever with Unreal Engine, and I appreciate Unreal Engine for what it is now. But today, like if I'm gonna make a game, there's just no comparison to the ease of getting adapted to Unity, but it's also because I've been with it for 17 years. Like
Hmm.
there's just nothing else that can compare. And everything for me on these new engines, I can learn them much quicker probably than most, but there's still that familiarity that Unity carries where it's going to be forever my choice of engine, whether I'm building an MMORPG, if I'm building an FPS, or if I'm building a hyper casual mobile game. I'm going to be a Unity user probably to the day I die.
Hmm. And speaking about some of the games that you've worked on, because I think we kind of skipped over your background a little bit. You've worked at Adult Swim and Cartoon Network,
Cartoon
correct?
Network. Yep. So I got my start in the games industry when I was, gosh, I was 19 years old. Backtrack a little bit. When I was 16, I used to code RuneScape private servers, which was my favorite game back then. It got me into gaming growing up. From 2002 to 2005, I was a diehard RuneScape fan. And then I got into the private server community, and it was using Java, but I didn't really understand Java or the language or the coding anything at that point. I was what you would call like a script kiddie. And I decided I want to learn to make my own games, and Unity became free, and I picked it up, and it was very difficult and challenging to use.
Hmm.
But I wanted to be a game developer, so I obsessed over Unity. I spent 2 years learning and making games. I started teaching some other people how to do it, and then by the time I was 19, I actually wrote a book on Unity in C Sharp. It was one of the first Unity programming books that was available with A Press Publishing. And from that, I got a call one day from Cartoon Network saying, "Hey, Adult Swim is building some video games, and they'd like to talk with you." And that kind of kicked me off into my first kind of like big publisher game studio. And working at Adult Swim and game and Cartoon Network, it was incredible from the point of view of it's this big, amazing name. The studio was amazing. I got to see how all the animated cartoon shows that we all know and love were made. The games team was phenomenal. But ultimately, what happened very shortly after that was I started getting calls from AT&T and Coca-Cola and GE, and they're like, "Hey, we are interested in doing this augmented reality stuff. There's nobody in Atlanta that knows how to do that, but I have like 4 years of this self-taught experience with Unity." And so I left the games. I left the games industry to go do that, and I quickly fell in love with how I spent the last 3 years obsessing over building video games in Unity to finally work at Cartoon Network to then be offered an opportunity to go work on some elevator application for like ThyssenKrupp. And I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. For some reason, I just know how to build whatever it is they're asking me to. And it's because of all the problem solving that I did building games. And then I fell in love with that concept. I was like, oh my God. Also, there's no crunch, and I'm paid significantly more. We're talking like we're at the time when I was working for Cartoon Network. I think we're talking almost 5 times more because I was 19 years old and Cartoon Network knew that I wanted to work for them, and I was God, I think I was making minimum wage for the opportunity to work for them, and then I turned, and then I upgraded to a $30 an hour job to go build stuff for AT&T and Coca-Cola and ThyssenKrupp, and I was just like, oh my God, okay, I buy games. I'm gonna go do this because it was amazing. I never worked more than 40 hours. My knowledge grew exponentially working with other engineers that are just in the enterprise world. And I just fell in love with that concept because now that was the easy way in. I taught thousands how to learn to code by building video games and then go get a job working for the enterprise world.
I mean, I think like as like a very like interesting point about that, like as I said, like we're kind of wrapping up 2024. It has been quite a very nasty year in terms of the game dev space, in terms of layoffs, studio closures, and just how much things have really hurt. And not only like trying to get into the game industry, but just staying in. And
Yeah.
I think one of the big things that will probably be like a future story will be more about game dev unions and trying to get some kind of stability. Because as you said, like a lot of companies kind of exploit that passion of, yeah, you want to make video games, so you don't care about stuff like paid overtime or holiday
Exactly.
weekends or, working 40 hours a week. You want to make games, so here, how about you work on games for like 90 hours a week? You can enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a really good friend who is the definition of a game developer. He lives in Santa Monica, and
Hmm.
for 8 years, he worked for probably 13 different game studios because it wasn't uncommon, especially 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon where a game project finishes and you're just going to walk across the street to the next studio.
Yep.
And he did that for years. And then finally, he got an augmented reality job for an automotive company, and he's been there for 6 years. Like
Hmm.
that's the reality right there, and that's why my position on it is, you look at the games industry, and yeah, it's like you work in games, but man, you're going to work really hard. You can expect crunch culture, it's still there, and you are going to be,
Hmm.
I don't want to say the terms exploited because there are roles, especially in the tech sector, where you'll be paid what you're worth. But recognize that they are getting brutally beaten right now. The last 2 years, I think we saw over almost 40,000 layoffs.
Hmm.
um, the stability in games is getting restructured right now, and this just isn't a problem when you go beyond gaming. If you go
Hmm.
beyond gaming, you work for enterprise, you go work for a medical simulation company, you're going to be employed for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Versus gaming, it could end tomorrow. Studios flop all the time, and we're seeing it where even though these game studios made record profits, they are just cutting they're just cutting staffing left and right. And when it comes to do I want to go work in games? You can always make games on the side, and that's what we tell our students. Like, hey,
Hmm.
go work for AT&T as a software developer because you're going to make an amazing salary. You're going to get paid more than you would in games. You're not going to work more than 40 hours likely. And then
Hmm.
you can always make the game that you want to make on the side. Nobody says you can't publish your own games. That's the whole concept of being an indie developer today.
Hmm.
Anyone can do it. And if that's what you're passionate about, great. Make income and continue doing it on the side.
Yeah, and that's been, I think, a very common suggestion from a lot of like the industry veterans about being able to have like a full time or part time job as kind of your primary income, and then working on games as kind of a part time or a side gig because it is a very hard industry to stay in. And again, like I can regale you with lots of stories and all the games that I've played of titles that have just come out and poof, they're gone. Like no one plays them. They're not available, and it is incredibly difficult to get like to stay in, no matter what people say about the likes of Vampire Survivors. What's like the big game of this year? Like UFO 50. Again, like I've been playing. I'm doing IGF judging, so my mind is like in constant like playing indie game mode. But
You-
again, like for every game that everyone talks about saying I want to build the next of this, I can think of several hundred of games that just no one's played them, and that studio
yeah,
is sometimes just not around anymore.
do you remember the closure of Telltale Games and
Mm-hmm.
how that shook the industry?
Yep.
That was a bad day to want to break into games because you had, I think it was 300 of the most talented people in games right now on the market. And if you wanted to be in games, you are certainly behind those
Yeah.
300.
And
But no one saw that. That was a huge franchise. The Walking Dead franchise failed. Nobody saw that coming. And
yeah.
the studio closed. And
And
that can happen in games.
and
Doesn't
I,
really happen in enterprise.
I think what's kind of like very funny is that we were talking about like the difference between like indie and AAA studio like 10 years ago. It kind of like was the opposite. If you were an indie studio, if you had one bad game, that's it. You're dead. You're gone. You're
You're
never gonna
dead.
be seen.
Yeah.
Now it's like the AAA side is, oh, that game didn't meet the 99.9% quota by the publisher. You're gone.
Yeah.
Even if that game, I was just talking with someone the other night about Tango GameWorks. Again, like Hi-Fi Rush became, or I keep confusing the name with another one, but like they put out a Game of the Year winning title last year. Like it came out of nowhere and succeeded. Like it went over expectations. They still closed.
Yeah.
And
Well, look at Riot Games. Riot Games just reported record profits, and they just laid off another 40 people on top of the 500 that they laid off last year.
yeah,
It's everywhere, unfortunately. And like when it comes to games, nobody is safe. And programmers, we usually see in the market that programmers are usually the last to get laid off, but now
mhm,
it's just studios are getting acquired and redundancies are getting cut. Doesn't matter what your
yep,
role is, and it's a tough thing to navigate. And truthfully, my positioning is I don't want to be in that position. I love
mhm,
games. I love building video games. I can always do that on the side, and if I get lucky, I can start my own indie studio, then make a great hit game.
mhm,
But man, would I pass up the opportunity of 6, 10 years of confident employment with a DoD simulation company to live my dream of building video games when I could still live my dream of building video games on the side? Like
yeah,
that is the thing because I see it a lot and right now too. I mean, and there are opportunities still in games. For example, I'm sure you know who Amir Satvat is. Amir
sounds familiar.
Satvat, he is the um, he is the godfather right now of like of the games industry. He is reporting on all of the layoffs and tracking the
Hmm.
40,000 people that have been affected by it, and he's helping them get back to work by sourcing the thousands of jobs that are still available for game developers and game people working in games. Like for example, if you look up Amir Safat right now, you'll see there's about 15,000 vacant roles. So if you want to go in gaming, there's
Hmm.
still an opportunity there from every discipline, from game design to art to sound to programming. But just recognize that you're going to work really hard. You might not make as much money as you would make
Hmm.
working in enterprise, and the stability is it's super uncertain right now.
Yeah. And it's why, again, like for a lot of the indie developers who've been surviving, they've been doing other work. They know not to commit 100% to their project unless they know that, unless you're a studio like a New Blood, Kid Fox, Strange Scaffold, that there has to be some kind of guardrail in place for you as a developer. Because if there isn't, what happens if that game doesn't work? The one that you just spent the last 3 to 5 years of your life on.
Yeah. Well, what's really sad is that I'm seeing stories pop up recently of people that moved countries for the games
Uh,
industry. You know, people from like the Netherlands moving to the US to only lose
mm,
their jobs 6 weeks later.
mm-hmm.
Like, that is terrifying.
Yep.
Um, and luckily too, we have remote work now. Remote work is plentiful.
Yep.
Bungie is fully remote, and they've proven they can make great games. They can continue to operate efficiently, and we don't really need to do in-house anymore. I think a few studios, I think Blizzard maybe did a back to office thing. I don't fully recall if that was what they did, but there's opportunities now where, especially for myself, if I'm gonna launch a game studio, I'm going to hire the best talent worldwide. I'm not going to just limit myself to Hawaii or Jacksonville, Florida, for example. Like I can get the best developers in the world, and some of them are not even here in the United States.
Yeah.
So traveling and putting yourself at risk like that, so you don't really have to do that anymore. And there's a lot of studios that are embracing remote work, and that also makes it a great industry to be a part of because the way we do it, not only are games going remote, but so is just tech work in general.
Mm-hmm.
Most software development employers are still remote. Our students, I don't remember the last time. I think it's been years since someone reported I actually have to go into an office building.
Yeah.
Unless you're working for Amazon or Apple, you're not really going to have that worry.
Yep. And that is, again, really great and was something I wish we had back in like the early 2000s in
Yeah.
terms of having that kind of connectivity. And I guess to kind of take this back to like your courses then, since we've been talking about a lot on the doom and gloom of game dev. So I guess with like how, I guess with your approach, like where do you start in terms of advising someone or getting them into like coding side? Like I guess like to as a another brief question for that, the people like your students, do they come in with like any kind of like game dev or program background, or do you have people who have never touched a computer, they have no idea what programming is?
Yeah, we have people of all walks of life. Usually it's never written a single line of code, and that's okay. A lot of people want to get into tech but don't know where to start. It is the number one problem that most people have when learning to code is how do I get started and what do I want to actually do as a software engineer? The realm of coding is massive. You can be a game developer, you can be an XR developer, you could be a DevOps developer, back-end developer, front-end developer, a web developer, mobile developer. So deciding on one, the type of developer you want to be, and then two, as soon as you try to get started on your own, you're just going to see this flood of information. And it's, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 17 years ago when I started, there was like three resources to get started. Today, there's millions and it's a flood of information. And so,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, for those getting started, you don't know what you don't know. So, you have to find a resource or an expert that can literally guide you on that structured A to Z approach. And for us, what we do is we want to educate you on the landscape. So we have resources that say, hey, do you want to check out what it is to be a web developer? Do you want to see what a game developer does, what an XR developer does? Do you want to check out what a backend developer does? And then hopefully the decision is going to be like, okay, these are all really interesting. The most appealing might be game development. And then we educate you further on, great, here's the games industry. It's a $200 billion industry. It's really exciting. It's really awesome. 100 billion of it is just mobile gaming now, but that's just the surface of what's possible for you. And so we
Mm-hmm.
educate them on here's also what you can do by learning to code with us using video games. Because yes, you can go work for these great game studio companies, but then also you can now go work for these automotive companies, these medical simulation companies. The DoD across the United States is hiring simulation developers, and they all use the same tech stack that we're building video games with today. So it's really just about educating them on here's all of the opportunities that are going to be available to you. Now, to get started, we're going to go ahead and build this video game. But just remember, everything you do here, it will carry over seamlessly. And that's going to make sense to you as you go through the program because we do a mix of building games and real world applications. And
Mm-hmm.
we do it in a disguising way where you're still building your video game, but you're actually doing a data driven connected app with like an AWS server. And so you're actively applying to your game the same stuff you would do for an inventory management system with Walmart, for
Mm-hmm.
example. It's the same tech stack.
All right. And with like the games like that you're teaching through your courses and your program, do you pick like a specific genre? Do you change a genre, course by course? Like where I guess do people begin with like the type of game that they're trying to build?
So it varies. So we tried to make it to where students can build the games that they truly want to build. And what we do is we try to steer them. And this is a big issue with a lot of a lot of students that come on board and where they know they want to be a game developer and so they come to Gamedev HQ and I want to be a game developer. I want to build my dream MMO FPS. And what's really important to understand here is my job is to get you employed as a software developer. And what that means is that I need you to learn what I need you to learn so that I can get you hired. That doesn't always mean you're going to learn what you want to learn. So, for example, on our platform, you're not going to find a course on how to make a racing game or how to make an RPG game. It's not my job to show you how to build those games. It's my job to teach you how to think like a software engineer, how to break down game mechanics to its smallest form, and how to become a self-sufficient software engineer so that if you go through this program and then you want to build your dream racing game, you don't need me to do it. You can go just do it because you're going to be a software developer. You're going to know how to build your dream game. So to make it exciting, though, we guide you down the path of we're going to build this type of game. We're going to build a 2D shooter type game, maybe like a game like Galaga. But where it gets unique is I'm going to allow you to customize every single feature about it. If you have an idea for some unique homing missile or boomerang effect or whatever your mind can think of, it's designed so that you can build the features you want to build. And you go through the problem solving process of how to build what you want to build. And so what happens is I can take 30 students, they all start at the same course, but by the end, they have 30 different unique games.
So it sounds like how you're describing game dev is quite a little bit, I think, on the opposite side of how I approach things. Like I definitely go from the mechanics side, the genre side. Like I am not a programmer by any measure. My brain does not work with code, but I can tell you exactly how to make a platformer feel good or how a racing game can work. And it is very interesting about how these two kind of applications will work. Because again, like one of the things I talk a lot about is the art and the business side of game dev. Like for my audience probably watching this right now, they will probably be coming at this very much on the art side. Like when you say stuff like you can go work at Walmart, you can do stuff at Coca-Cola, their minds are probably just going, they're shutting off as you're saying those words. But it's still very important to be able to understand these two universes because as we've been saying, yes, if you learn game dev, that's great. How are you going to live while you're making that dream game? Or how can you apply this somewhere else? And that, I think, has always been like that challenge. Because just as we can say, like, if you want to be 100% business-minded or 1% art-minded, you're still going to be missing something when it comes to either how you make games or how you make a living. And it's very important, I think, to have that balance between the two.
Yeah, I know, 1,000%. And you know, this is where in games especially, games is all about communication and collaboration. You know, in my specialty, I'm a coder. I'm terrible with art. I've downloaded Blender. I did a 4-hour tutorial on how to make a teacup, and I could not uninstall that application faster. Zero interest in the art pipelines. But what's important for me as a software developer is that I can communicate effectively with artists. But you know, when you're building a game and doing an indie thing, you're going to have a team. It's not just going to be you, although it is possible to do just you, right? We have games like Flappy Bird and Crossy Roads that made $1 million in 45 days, and it was one developer. You have what's that farming game that's one developer?
Stardew Valley? Or
yes, Stardew Valley. Yes, Stardew Valley has done what? $100 million, and it was one developer. So sometimes you can do both. You can be the artist, you can be the coder, you can be the business brains behind everything. But oftentimes you're going to have partners and things like that. You'll collaborate with people who can help you bring your vision and things like that to life, which then leads into opportunities like A16Z Speedrun, which is a venture capitalist for the games industry, where I think it's like every 6 months, they spend $20 million to help you pilot and kickstart your dream game idea. And they'll fund it, and they'll give you $750,000 for you and your team to spend the next 18 months working on it. So it's pretty cool. It's more accessible now than ever to really get involved in the games industry than it was, you know, back in the 90s and 2000s.
Oh, yes. For sure. And again, as we were saying a few minutes ago, that also means that everyone is trying to get in, which makes it that much harder for you to stand out. So I guess to keep with like the courses and your program that you've been working on, with like how, I guess like, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this. I guess how do you bridge that gap then between you're going to learn how to make a racing game, you're going to learn how to make a simple shooter, and how do you then, like, kind of, I don't want to say sneak in, but kind of, like, bring in this idea of, hey, you're learning this, but it can also be applied over here. that's not game related.
Sure. Yeah, so a great way to look at it is like, okay, I'm building this like space shooter. How does that
Mm-hmm.
apply to me building my 3D FPS game,
Mm-hmm.
right? So fundamentally, what is a software engineer? A software engineer is the ability to research and solve problems. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's all we're doing. When we look at building an FPS game, I might focus on my character controller. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Well, I got to think about the input. Am I using WSAD keys or am I using a game controller? And from that point, I can research how do I enable input? How do I detect whether or not the WSAD keys were pressed and what value is returned and what can I do with that value? Because once I understand the problem I'm trying to solve, I know what to research, I know what to think about, and I know how to implement this stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm building a 2D game controller or if I'm building a 3D game controller, as long as I start to identify the problem, the smallest problem I'm trying to solve, which for these controllers is starting with input. Once you have your input, then we can focus on, okay, what about the speed of these players? How do I implement the speed across this? What about the feel of this? Like, do I want it to have that fun mechanic where like you almost get like a split second delay when you're jumping off a platform and things like that? So you start to identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you learn how to approach and actually solve and research these solutions. And from that, you almost build up this just tool set of collective problem solving. And now what's going to end up happening is, one day I'm just thinking about I want to build a game like RuneScape. How would I build the inventory system? And you're just going to be able to. It's just going to click for you because you've been solving those problems. When I look at an inventory system, what do I have to think about? How many slots is that inventory system? How am I going to represent the slot? Am I going to have a node-based system, or if I'm going to have an image, a blank image to that this is an available slot? Are those going to be sprites? Like you start thinking in terms of how do I bring these game mechanics to life? Or think about the concept of a racing game. This is a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of a racing game, the concept of speed, the concept of time, your acceleration. These things don't exist. You, as a software developer and programmer, have to define these traits for the racing game. So if I want to create a vehicle that can accelerate, it doesn't know what acceleration is. So I'm going to define an acceleration rate. And then from there, I can apply it. And what's going to apply it? What's the input that might apply that acceleration? And then we're going to talk about how do I now, okay, great. I have this thing going up. How do I now move the object? And we start getting into forces. And so it's fundamental breaking down the problems to the individual smallest thing you're trying to solve. And you're building it up step by step. And by doing that, you name any game mechanic, any game feature, I can solve it because that's my job as a software engineer is fundamentally to think about a problem, break it down to its smallest form, research and solve and find solutions. And so that's why the way we teach this, we guide you down a path of all these collective elements that apply to so many different genres, but also apply to the entire enterprise industry without you even knowing that it does that. And ultimately, what you end up with is if you go through this entire curriculum, great,
Mm-hmm.
you want to build your dream MMO FPS, you can actually do it because you have spent 900 hours problem solving these unique things that we've given you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And
it's really effective.
Yeah, but that's, I think, a really good point about kind of giving someone all the tools they need to start figuring this stuff out. Because as you said, like, part of the challenge of getting into game dev, and this is what I found while I was trying to do this back in, like, 2007, 2008, is that there's 10 billion different websites and videos and books out there. If I don't even know, like, what coding is, how the heck am I going to start doing something? Because again, like, as another point for, I'm sure you've seen with a lot of students, a lot of people just want to rush that dream game. I don't want to learn how to, make a character walk left to right. I want to make, again, the space sim visual novel 4X FPS game of my dreams. But how do you begin that? I don't know. I just
Yeah.
want to do it.
Right, exactly. And I talk to so many people. I talk to hundreds of people. This exact problem. They come to Gamedev HQ and I want to build my dream MMORPG FPS game. And great, tell me about it. And what happens is you're going to light up with passion for it because that's what got you here to begin with. And it's amazing to see because that passion and excitement is going to be why you're going to want to learn to do this right. Because right now you don't know how to build that. But I promise you, if you go back to if you do this correctly, here's an A to Z structured approach. You're going to learn what you don't know. And by doing that, you're actually going to be able to build and start, and most importantly, finish your dream game. Because right now, I have
Mm-hmm.
many students that join us with some experience where that's how they got started. They tried to build their dream game and it got too hard and they end up quitting. And they'll spend 3 weeks
Yep.
on it and just quit. I've never finished anything in my life because I either get distracted or it gets too hard and I don't know how to finish. That is because there are fundamental gaps in what you don't know, what you don't know. And so you're missing a fundamental ability to recognize a problem and break it down to its smallest form, which is exactly what we train you to do. Because my whole thing, my whole teaching philosophy is I hate spoon feeding. When I was learning to code, I hated when someone else had the answers and instead of telling me how they knew how to do something, they just showed me how to do it. That means that the next time I'm stuck, I have to go back to that person. I hated that. And so everything we do at Gamedev HQ is zero spoon feeding. If you build the game, if you have a dream game that you want to build, my goal is that you're going to be able to go in our curriculum. You will go and learn so far beyond anything I actually teach at Gamedev HQ because I don't want to babysit you and have you coming back to me for information. I truly want to pull back the curtain and show you how I know exactly how I know what I know. And this is going to unlock the way for you to grow as an engineer without me because that's the only way you're going to actually work professionally. There's no tutorial that's going to actually help you in your job. And so the moment we get past that, you actually get to be a free software engineer who can learn and grow and do things on your own. Recognize that just because I'm a mentor and instructor does not mean I have all the answers, nor do I want to have all your answers.
Yeah, you don't want people emailing you at like 3 o'clock in the
Exactly.
morning. How do I do this?
Exactly. Exactly. You're working for a unique company, a unique game. There's no YouTube tutorial that's going to be exactly what you need. So it's important that you actually learn how to be a software engineer.
Yep.
And that's what we focus on is really the core of what it means to be a developer.
Yeah. And as you were giving your example about kind of like avoiding spoon feeding, that takes me to so many videos I made about good onboarding when it comes to teaching someone how to just play a video game. And because again, like a lot of what we talk about definitely has intersections in terms of how to learn good game design, can teach you about how to learn really good skills and stuff along those lines. And it is again like very fascinating because like we were having this conversation in 2024, like talking about having like dedicated programs or using game dev beyond just something at DigiPen or what was it? Oh, the Art Institute. That I think they went out in like the
Oh, there we are.
2010s.
It went out. Yeah.
Yeah, like that was very much unheard of. And like as I was talking to John before we start, like a lot of what I like to do is trying to bridge that gap between academia and video games, and we're seeing more of that. I think slowly take shape. I would say over like the last like 7 to 8 years of even like more like high schools and colleges being more open to this idea of using game dev and video games in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's more accessible than ever today to go down this route. And unfortunately, too, what that leads to is there's just so much information out there that
Yeah.
people just you get bogged down. And YouTube has its time and place. YouTube is great if I'm looking specifically for what I know I need. Like if I want to create a loot system and I want to watch how someone else implemented it. Great. YouTube is fantastic for that. But using YouTube to build your game, you're going to be jumping around to 1,000 different tutorials, 1,000 different instructors, and it's just going to be a frustrating experience.
Yeah.
Also, you're going to be stuck with imposter syndrome because you're going to feel like you constantly need a tutorial.
Yep.
Versus if you just take the time to do this right, you'll completely rid yourself of imposter syndrome and you'll have the confidence to continue learning and growing and you'll be able to build your game without a YouTube tutorial.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a win-win to do it right.
Yep. I guess another question for you about like your course and programs is like it's like how young like do like your students like starting? Because again, I've talked to junior high students, I've talked to college level. I guess so. Like for you, like where do they begin?
Yeah, so the youngest student we've ever had in this program was 11 years old, who was a homeschool kid, very bright. By the time he was 13, this kid was honestly better than I was. It was nuts. He had like a dozen games under his belt. The oldest student we have is, gosh, I think he's 68 years old. And he came from like a simulations background already, but wanted to re-enter the workforce and took some time off and ended up being a tech artist for like some train simulation company. But yeah, when it comes to ageism in tech, it's very different than any other industry. That guy who's 68 years old, he can hold conversations with people that age about the early days of computing. He has a very rare opportunity to leverage how much he knows about how technology has shaped the world that you can't find amongst people like myself, for example. I date back as early as maybe Delphi. That's all I can talk about. I've heard of things like Cobalt and things like that, but that was not my generation. But you have people who can talk about Commodore 64s. Never seen one. like like when you can hold that type of conversation, there is an element of experience that comes with your age. So ageism in tech works very different. We've had many people actually north of 50 go through our program to get back into the workforce, and they're doing crazy things now. Virtual reality, and they probably never thought that would be a possibility for them, but it is, because truthfully there is such a demand for Unity developers and Unreal developers that go beyond gaming. There is a shortage of engineers in this country. There's a shortage, massive shortage globally of engineers. And so here's someone who's maybe 56 years old, who grew up with the I don't know how you'd call it, the revolution of technology, and has the skill set of a Unity developer and has an interest in XR. Hired. It's really not that difficult.
Yeah. And again, like, I think as time keeps going on, especially as, again, like, we're kind of like in, like, I would say, like, the middle of like how much video games have really changed not only the industry but the world itself in terms of software and what we're seeing, that it's still very much room to grow in terms of, I guess, like, just how much value this stuff has. Again, like, if we're talking 10 years ago, even like 14, 15 years ago, no one was thinking about having like courses on video games. No one was even thinking about video games being anything more than just, again, a simple toy. But it really wasn't until this past decade that everyone has seen, hey, video games make a lot of money. There's a lot of skills that go into this. And like, as like another big point about stuff that I see a lot of developers like miss out on is the idea of the management side, the actual planning and the development. Because again, you can have that dream idea in your head. If you can't figure out, okay, how do I actually build this over the next 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And as you said earlier, like, finishing a project is perhaps like the hardest thing when it comes to video games.
It's hard. It's hard, but once you do it once, that's it. You'll finish every other game you start, because you know how to. You'll have the experience and you'll have the drive to do it again. Game designers, that concept of like a waterfall document and a great idea. 15 years ago, you could be a game designer with a great idea and get paid a lot of money to work in games. Today, I don't know a single game designer who is just quote unquote a game designer. They always have a secondary skill, whether it's a technical skill, an art skill, a management skill. You are going to be doing significantly more now than being an idea guy in gaming, because if you're just an idea guy, you don't need to go work for a studio. You can do an indie thing, and employers are not going to pay you just to be the idea guy. You need to contribute significantly to the project if you want to be one. Now that varies, right? You got Blizzard designers still that just, I'm sure that's all they do, and they're doing a lot of writing and things like that. But today, when people say I want to be a game designer, what else do you want to be? Because you need to think about how you're going to contribute valuably to the project beyond just your idea.
And again, like, for the people who approach us like purely from the artistic standpoint, because I know there's a lot of them watching this, at least on my side, they're going to be like, who the heck cares? I don't care about that kind of thing. And again, like, if you're just looking to do game dev like as a part-time thing or as a hobbyist, that is perfectly reasonable. If you have no intention of living off of your video games, you can make whatever the heck you want. You can take however long you want to do it. But again, like, the challenge of this is sustainability. How do you keep doing this? Because again, if you want to work on a project for 10 years, more power to you. How are you paying for everything else around you for said 10 years is a different story.
And the landscape is tough now. I mean, indie games are amazing. They've blown up. The greatest ones are on the Xbox stores and things like that, and even Apple Arcade is getting pretty good. But man, if you're I can only imagine how hard it must be today to market games and get seen, because I think what was that? I don't know the full number, but it was like 30,000 games were released last year on Steam. That's 30,000. There's more games than you could ever play in your lifetime getting released now on an annual basis. And that's just on the apps, and that's just on the storefronts that most of us here in the States know.
Hmm.
The Asian app stores are massive. And
Yes.
I mean, Asia's gaming market's also, I think, it's approaching north of, I want to say it's approaching north of like 60, $70 billion on its own right now. And I mean, these are, when it comes to getting your game seen, it's a phenomena to see who's successful and who's not. And you always see these. It's interesting. It's an interesting landscape in marketing your games. I don't even know the answer to that one, and I have friends who've done successful Kickstarters and they still flop. And I've it's such a, my gosh, for everyone out there doing games and funding your journey to be a game developer. I wish you guys so much success, but man, that terrifies me because I couldn't do it. You know, even with our current following, like I look at, oh, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. You just have no idea. You don't. That's the thing, right? You don't know if your game is going to be successful, and you just spend all this time working on it, and nobody will ever. Maybe someone will play it, or maybe they won't. You
Hmm.
know?
There's a good chance I'll be the one who plays it because last year I think I played over 1,000 video games. I covered
Oh
them.
my god, that's awesome.
Yeah, and
I
again, that's still like not even what, like 10% of the games that was
got
released.
29,000 to go.
Yeah, and
It's
yeah,
ridiculous. There's
yeah.
so many.
And
Go
like
ahead.
to your point about marketing, I could certainly teach you on that one because I've been covering games, I've been doing a store page reviews. It is hard, and again, it's just one part of what you need to learn to have a chance in this industry. And again, like that's what makes this very interesting. It also makes it very scary because you can approach this 100% from the business side. If you don't know how to speak to players, you don't know how to make a compelling game, it's going to flop. You can approach this
Yeah,
100% from the art side. But if you don't know how to actually plan a game and scope it out, again, you're never going to finish. And then
yeah,
again, like to the third point, you can do all that stuff right. If you don't know how to market your game in front of people, it's going to fail. Like there's so
exactly.
many mines you can step on when it comes to the game
Yeah.
industry.
You know, thinking about it, if I were to do this, I would do actually. I have a good friend who lives out of Japan, runs his studio out of Japan. It's called Accurus Games, and they started by doing a game jam, and they created a concept and they put it out there. And to their surprise, it kind of got some like viral attention, and I think they got a few thousand users. And from that, they started actually like working on this game, publishing it, and now they get something like 2,000 new players every single day. And like that to me is the way to approach games today, is create a concept in a weekend and test for fun factor. Put it out there and
Hmm.
see what people think. And if they like it, then go ahead and definitely put some effort into this thing, because otherwise, without some element of virality, I don't know how indie devs are succeeding anymore. You know,
Hmm.
it's not like do you remember that movie Indie Game the movie?
Hmm.
Did you watch that? Yeah, that,
Yep.
if for anyone who's listening who hasn't watched that, you should. It's very inspirational. Um, but you know, it used to be, okay, cool. I'm gonna be an indie game. I'm gonna get on the Xbox store and I'm gonna have massive success. But now it's flooded.
Hmm.
It's crazy.
Yep.
It really is.
And yeah, like, if you listen to like Super Hot, the developer of that, that all started from a game
Oh
jam
yeah,
as well. And people were just like,
yeah. That's from
well,
Indie Game.
what would be cool if we did this? And it turned out a
Yeah,
lot of people really enjoy that. You're talking about the Asian markets. Look at a studio like MiHoYo. Like 10 years ago, they were making like a simple like game jam. They were making like little browser games. Today, they're the developers behind Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and so on. They're like bringing in like what is like 50 to 60 million dollars a month per game
huge.
that they're
Yeah,
making.
Asian game market's huge, and we actually in the U.S. now. I think Unity. I don't know if it ever launched or if it got delayed, but Unity is working on an app store now that gets American games into the Asian markets. And there's a huge opportunity there. I mean, gaming is
Hmm.
big. There's still an opportunity. We're talking $200 billion industry. If
Yeah.
I want to be a game developer, there's still a huge potential to do it. Those who are innovating on gaming are still finding their way in the marketplace.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, man, how do you is it's the risk today. It's more risky today to fund your own development and pray that your game gets seen.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge today is how the publishing side of games. That's really the challenge, and like that's what
Hmm.
you need to research is how does publishing your game today work in a field of 30,000 other games?
And that again is that tough point about all this is that you can make that game, but as my the wind is like blowing for dramatic effect there.
No worries.
But you can have that amazing idea. If you can't get it in front of people, it doesn't matter. And
Exactly.
like to your point about kind of like the Asian markets as well, like we've another big thing that's happened over the last 10 years has been just how globalized the industry has become. Again, thanks to virtual offices, Steam, and so on. Like I've interviewed developers from Jamaica, Africa, India, of course, lots of developers from Poland, of course. But it's not that case anymore where I make a video game, I can only sell in my local store or in my one state. Like,
Right.
again, like there are student games I play from literally all around the world, and thanks to stuff like itch, Steam, and so on, it is possible. And it is, I think, that other wrinkle is that you can't just think about your game as I'm developing it for this specific audience in this specific part of the world. You have to think about, can my game make it from the West Coast in the United States all the way to Japan?
Yeah.
Can it succeed
Yeah.
like that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The landscape is challenging, but it's exciting. But this is why we tell our students, like, hey, I get it. Like I've
Hmm.
worked in games. It's so fun. It's so exciting. But man, go work beyond gaming because you're gonna find job stability there. You're gonna find higher pay, and you have this dream game. Invest your time and soul into it, but do it after you're paid as a software engineer. And that's also a win-win scenario there too for our students, because when they go work for
Hmm.
enterprise, you're now paid to continue learning and growing to be a better developer for your game. Like that is the
Hmm.
reality here once you get a job in this industry, is that you're going to, over the next 90 days working professionally, you will have learned more in those first 90 days than I could ever dream to teach you in our 900-hour track or in the amount of years some people spend learning this themselves. There's no parallel to real world experience. And the value there is that you're just going to grow as a great developer. And now you can just continue working on your game and get it done faster,
Yep.
and that's really what it is. And if you get lucky and your game hits it off big and you can now support yourself off the funds of your game, awesome. I have a friend who did a franchise effect where, and speaking of older gamers and game developers, um, his name is Joe Casava, and he runs a company called Puzzles by Joe. And I think he's 60. No, he might be in his 50. I think he's like mid 50s, late 50s. He runs a game called Clutter that is designed for the demographics of 65 and up, and he's developed, I think, 16 of them. And he now has a franchise effect where these older people in their 60s and 70s, they download one and then they go to his website and download all of them. And he's made $6-7 million off of this franchise of catering to a very old demographic. And it's just
Yep.
decluttering. It's built in Unity today, his games. And it's just a bunch of trash on screen and you have to declutter it. You
Mhm.
pick two items that match, it plays an animation, and old people love it.
Yep. And like to that point about like surviving and the constant learning, that is, I think, another thing a lot of people, especially like newcomers, don't really think about. Again, I think I'm sure you see this with a lot of your students. There's that assumption that I'm going to make my dream game, and that's it. The dream game comes out, I become rich and famous, I never have to work another day in my life. And if Jake Burkett from Grey Alien is listening to this, he just got like a chest pain as I said that. The
Yeah.
truth of the matter is that it is about constantly growing and learning. You have like you've brought up games like Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird was not their first game, or I'm sorry, Angry Birds. Like Angry Birds was not Rovio's first game. It was like their 65th, 67th
Yeah. Yeah.
prototype. A lot of what it means to survive in this industry is living long enough to be able to get that great game
Yeah.
out there. And again, like I have seen this from so many indie developers that they'll put out one game, it doesn't do well, They close like the next day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know many people like that. My own friends included. They lost. They got really discouraged, and that happens, especially
Yeah.
when you spent the last 18 months or more on that title because you're very close to it, right? Um, I don't even know how many games I've made that never saw the light of day, and it's just for me though. I look at it as a knowledge piece. It's learning, and this industry is very much a marathon,
Yep.
not a sprint. And it's a lifelong career of learning. Like, and that's who make the best developers are those who are looking for something where you want to feel like you're constantly learning and growing. You like to feel smart. You want to feel stimulated. A career in games will do that for you because you can't stop learning. You're at the forefront of the most bleeding cutting edge technology.
Yep.
This Unity updates every 2 weeks. It's very frustrating.
Yep.
But it's the industry that I love and I want to be a part of, and so I constantly am learning how to be the best at what I do.
Yeah. And again, like from what I talk about from a game design standpoint, if you think building a platformer like they did in 1993 is going to work in 2024, I have some very sad news for you. And it is about that kind of constant iteration and refinement. And you will rarely see that from someone's first game. Someone will obviously, I'm sure someone will comment down below saying, well, what about so-and-so? Their first game did amazingly well, a Minecraft being a good example. They put out Minecraft as the studio's first game. They made millions. Why don't I just make Minecraft? Okay, go for it.
Yeah. I remember when Flappy Bird was on its last final day, and the minute it went down, like thousands of clones went up. Everyone tried to get the Flappy Bird market share. Yeah, and it's really really interesting.
And it is again like that challenge of like teaching game dev and game design. Again, like you're talking to someone who's lived through every like indie big trend that's happened in the past 10 years. I've seen the Bullet Heaven trend, the deck builder trend, what was it, Darkest Dungeon trend. What else? We had a Super Meat Boy, the roguelike, Souls-like. I've seen and lived through all of them. And a lot of people, again, they have that assumption that if I can just do one game, then I can make every other game. If I know how to make a shooter, I can turn that into a strategy game or a deck builder. But it is about that constant learning. And to bring this to what you do, again, like, you have to have that foundational tool set. You can't just, can't just hit a button and say, okay, I'm going to go from making a shooter to a strategy game. They're video games. It's, 1-to-1, right?
Exactly. And Josh, that's like literally the number one problem with a lot of structured courses you'll find on platforms like Udemy, for example. You're learning to make one genre, one type of game.
Yeah.
But now what? Good luck extending it, first of all. But then two, what if you want to make now a racing game? You're now looking for a course that's going to teach you how to make a racing game. And you're just going to be stuck in tutorial purgatory forever because you're not taking the time to actually do this the right way. And that's why when you look at real game developers, I could spend half my career at Bungie working on Halo, and then I can go spend another 10 years working on a mobile hyper-casual game. Because when you're a true software engineer and game developer, you have the learning experiences and the problem-solving skill set to truly build games. And that's what game developers are. I'm not just a RPG game developer. I don't want to niche myself like that because that's a huge that's a scary niche to position yourself in. Or some people only want to build, for example, horror games. It's also a scary niche to put yourself in. It's important that you are fundamentally whether if you're going to be an artist, don't just be one type of artist. Experiment, right? You have stylistic, you have tune, you have hypercat, you have hyper realism. Experiment across the board with it because you don't want to just niche yourself in the art pipeline as well. So when it comes to what companies, especially in games, want, you have to be versatile in your skill set. Because today, my company, for example, builds RPG games, but tomorrow we might be an FPS company.
Yep.
And I need to know that I can keep you on board.
Yeah. And it's something I think we've also seen really have changed with the scope of indie developers over the past 10 years. Like, if we were talking about early 2010s, the idea was like a niche studio would just become very niche. This is going to be the FPS studio. This is going to be the strategy studio, and so on. But the studios that have been making it more sustainable have been about building that brand and saying, well, we could make an RPG, but how about we make, a dating sim? What about a puzzle game? But it's still kept within like that brand and that charm. If you look at studios like Clay Entertainment being a really quintessential example of this, they've made Don't Starve, Auction Not Included, Invisible Ink, like 3 completely different genres of games with 3 completely different markets, but they still fall into that brand of that company. And you really can't pigeonhole yourself, I think, as much anymore. Because as you said, like horror. Okay, well, we're recording this on Halloween. How many mascot-driven horror games have been released in the last 30 days? How many FNAF clones, or was it Garden of Band, whatever it's called? Or now we're seeing all the SCP-style games. Yeah, you can make a horror game.
Well, when I think horror, I immediately jump to what's the PT demo? There are so many clones now where you're walking around a house, it changes as you walk, and there's a dead woman chasing you. It is, they're and to be fair, like, don't get me wrong, that concept is incredible. But man, there are thousands of clones now that are just like that one. And it's because of the hype that PT demo received, and then it never got released. So everyone else was like, oh, I can do this. And you'll find some interesting adjustments to it, but for the most part, there's not a lot of innovation going on in the horror genre, and I think that's also what's really tough now. Is, originality of games is tough. I have students that are always scared to talk about their dream game ideas and things like that because they don't want anyone to steal them. And what I will say to everyone listening here is nobody wants your idea, and it's likely not the most original idea. Every game stems from some inspiration of another. And what's more important here is not your idea of your game, but can you actually execute and build your game? So don't be afraid to talk about your idea. Don't be afraid to share it. We used to do things with, and we still do, but we would consult with some studios that want to build things, and if I have to sign an NDA just to hear your idea, I'm not going to do it because your idea doesn't mean anything to me. Like, an idea is great. I've probably heard it before.
And again, like, for your students watching me, you're talking to someone who has played thousands of indie games at this point, and let alone the ones that I haven't even covered. Like, your idea, more than likely, I've either heard someone either do almost exactly, or I've, understand it already. Like, you're telling someone who has seen it all and have played it all, and that makes it a lot harder for like these games to stand out. And again, like as we've said, like if you're just pigeonholing yourself to one genre or one type of game, what happens when someone beats you to the punch? What if someone does create the next FNAF or the next Outlast? Can your game compete with that? Do you have another idea? Because again, that's the other point that I'm sure you've seen from a lot of your students. A lot of people just have one idea. That's it. Like, that's the only game they want to make. Okay, so what do you do after that?
Yeah, right. What do you do after that? And for me, for example, my favorite game of all time is, well, for consoles it was definitely the Halo 3 game, but for PC it was RuneScape. And like, my dream today is to still build, if I ever find the time, is to build an MMORPG inspired by RuneScape. Because I don't believe old school RuneScape has been redone the way I would like to see it done, but also recognizing that audience, one, I can't compete against Jagex. I never will be able to compete against Jagex. They got 20-year head start on my game. But then two, recognizing too, like, who's going to play this game with me? And that's where game development can be really interesting, where, there's two sides to it. There are studios and there's people who build games for money, and that's not a problem, but recognize that, when you build your passion projects, like, you're doing it for you. Like, if I build that game, it's because I'm going to play it with a very small group of my friends who I said, hey, I built this thing, come play this with me so I can I can simulate some level of an economy in this thing. Or I get lucky and it blows up and everyone wants to play this thing. But that's the thing. For me, I build games for the passion of it. And if I get money from it, fantastic. But I would never risk For me, it's too risky to build a game to make money because I'm just not passionate about doing that, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah, and it is two very, I think, different skill sets about building a game purely from the art side and building a game thinking about, okay, how is someone who's never heard of me before, who has no idea who I am, how are they going to play this game and will they enjoy this game? Because that's the other point. Again, like you're talking to someone who has played games that have had less than 10 reviews on Steam. I play games that have had 0 reviews on Steam. And I can enjoy this game, but I can also write you a complete itemized list of every single issue that I see that will have and definitely has stopped someone from wanting to play it. And it is again like it's a very specific skill set, but it's still something you have to learn. And if you don't learn this stuff, okay, yeah, you can make that very competent game. I can almost guarantee you that no one is going to play it. I can because I've seen it. I've seen games from
Yeah. Oh,
developers
yeah,
who,
there's so many great games. I'm sure that it
yeah,
just like they flopped and they're great. One of them is if you ever heard of the game called Richard, that was the game that actually changed my life to where we are today, where it was the first game. It was so ahead of its time. It was the first Unity game on the PS3, and it's called Richard. It's about these space. It's about this like space character, Miner, and
yes,
the game was incredible. It was the most beautiful, fun platformer ever, and it proved the concept that a talented, hardworking team could produce quality work with the Unity game engine. And when that game came out, it was the first game in a very long time that I played through start to finish without putting it down and like just fell in love with it. I'm like, that's it. I'm sold. I'm no longer deciding is my career going to be in Unreal or is my career going to be in Unity? Unity is my career because it proved that this engine is worth my time because if I know that I'm going to commit to this, I can make something great in it.
yeah,
And sadly, very shortly after the release of that, the entire studio shut down. And it was such a great game, but
yeah.
they just lack the traction.
And here's like the very sad part, like between like your audience and my audience watching us right now, I'm sure most of the people probably never heard of that game.
Oh yeah,
And
no, it's so ahead of its time.
and again, I played through. I think I'm pretty sure I beat that game back in the day.
Yeah, it
And
had an
again,
amazing gravity gun effect, and
yeah,
it was so it felt so good. I was like, I couldn't believe that this game was made with Unity. It was
yeah.
amazing.
And again, like I'm someone who I probably have forgotten more games than I think most people will ever play. And it's that challenge again of you can do things legitimately correct. You can make that perfectly. I think I just wrote a post about this. I made a video. You can make like the objectively good video game. Do follow all the math, follow all the videos and tutorials. It'll still fail. Just as you can just close your eyes and make this crazy idea. What was it? A Lethal Company that came out last year. Like I heard, like it was just a game by like one person. I think they were a student.
Oh my god, yeah, that game's generated like $50 million.
Yeah,
I think it was a college kid that made that.
yeah.
Amazing. It that's just it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Today, because game development is so accessible to anyone, that dream that you could hit it big
Mm-hmm.
can happen. And that's the thing. There's no recipe for it.
Well,
Nobody has
yes.
figured out how to crack it. You
Yep.
still have the massive players. Like, for example, there is some level of you follow this recipe and you're going to succeed. We see that amongst Riot and Bethesda and Blizzard.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the people like Lethal Company. The
Yeah.
one college kid had an idea, made this game, it blew up somehow,
Mm-hmm.
and now he made $50 million.
Yeah. And but here's again like, the problem with that. Now you have students thinking, okay, why can't I do that? Why can't I just make one game and it makes
Exactly.
$50 million? Or I'm just going to repeat Lethal Company because again we've been mentioning clones. How many Lethal Company clones have we seen? How many
The,
vampire? Oh
the
my god! How many?
Pokemon clone that just blew up. What was that game? It was
Pal
like,
World.
oh, Power Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that game made a. Did it make $1 billion? I think it made $1 billion
Yeah.
in sales. That game.
Vampire Survivors. Do you like for you and for like your audience? You have no idea how many Bullet Heaven clones I have played
Right.
in the past 3 years of Vampire Survivor likes. I could
Yeah.
scare you with the list that I've had to play of that genre.
It's it's yeah. My advice is like build the game you're passionate about. If you want to build something inspired by Five Nights at Freddy, think of an innovative twist and build it. And maybe it gets big, but I don't know. Recognize that you're there for the learning journey and because you want to play the games that you want to play.
Yep.
That's how I approach it. I'm
Yep.
building this because I actually want to play this, not because 10 million other people want to, which if they did would be amazing.
Yep.
But I don't know. I've done a lot of collaboration projects over the years, and not a single one has ever been successful because it's so hard. And this is
Yep.
you're talking to someone who's done this for 17 years, hundreds of games that I've self built. That most of them, all of them, almost have never seen the light of day. But the ones that have, they're just no, they never go anywhere because it's so much work. I spent all this time building it. There's a whole nother side of games, which is the business of games, the marketing of games. And I'm just not that passionate about that side.
Yep.
And so because of that, I don't put as much effort into it. And it's really, even if I found a co-founder that's what they love to do, gosh, they still are competing on a landscape of 30,000 games that were released on Steam, just Steam.
Yep.
That doesn't include the 100,000 games that were released on itch.io.
Oh, yes. And again,
nuts.
it's very challenging to do all this, and it's why you have to really be very grounded, I think, if you want to survive in this industry. Because again, you can make that dream idea, but as you said, if no one does any marketing, no one does any reach out, it's dead in the water. Just as conversely, you can have someone who's that perfect marketer, but if they don't understand the game dev side, they don't understand how to get this game from crazy idea in your head to a finished product, okay, you have a lot of smoke and mirrors, and that's it.
Yep. And yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about I was thinking about like the big companies like EA and Activision. How many more Maddens and Call of Duties are they gonna do? Like think about how those concepts just that's all they do. That's all they're known for. And eventually I feel like people are just gonna like are people ever gonna stop playing this? Because I haven't played Call of Duty since like Modern Warfare 2. I have no interest anymore in those games. So it's like I wonder when that's gonna become a problem for them, where Activision is gonna be forced or I don't know. I think I think the Treyarch team does Call of Duty. I think there's enough players for them not to have to worry about that. But I also wonder, like, there's no innovation anymore in those games. It's very rare that they come out with new things. The latest one I think was Black Ops. What was it? The battle royales, right? Like Fortnite style. That was the most innovative thing they've done in probably 10 years.
Yep. And again, it's that idea of you keep chasing it, eventually people are just going to get tired of that same formula. Again, is why there's been that huge boom of indie developers. Again, I can't even tell you how many indie developers I've spoken to are like, I do not ever want to work for an EA or an Activision or a Blizzard. The thought of just making Call of Duty or Halo or whatever sounds like my nightmare. I want to make this, crazy dating sim. I think I play a game about you're running botanical gardens. Again, the variety of indie games is infinite at this point. And it is great. But as we've been saying, you can make that dream idea, but if you don't understand like that foundational side of things, how long is that going to take you to make? Because one thing that we haven't spoken about is the amount of time. Watching, if you don't have that foundation, again, with something like what you do and something that I do, if you're just looking around for tutorials and watching guides and just switching back and forth, how much time are you really eating up for that? One of the biggest things about game dev, I think this is one of the biggest tips I can give for your students, is that you want to maximize this. You want to be able to do this as quickly and as efficiently as possible. You don't want to be spending 5 to 8 years of your life on just one game. Maybe that could have worked 10 years ago when no one was making indie games.
Well, yeah, it took it took only publishers had access to get games out there, right? It used to be in a box store. Now it's all digital format, and yeah, it's risky to spend that much time on your dream game, and some people still do it. If you go on YouTube, you'll see stories and documentaries of people who I quit my job and spent the last 36 months building this dream game, and it either flopped or they got lucky and actually got successful. But it's
it's also why getting information from those people is sometimes not the best, because having someone teach you, okay, this is how I succeed in 2014, Well, guess what? It's not
That's not the same
2014
game.
anymore. One of my favorite
Yeah.
guests was when I spoke with Rami Ishmael from Vlambeer, and he said that he understood that he was incredibly lucky. And he knows that if he tried to make the exact same game that made him famous, like Nuclear Throne and the other ones today, it would flop because the market has changed.
It's nuts. I have to imagine today when it comes to marketing games, you got to be all over. I mean, it's a full time. It's three full-time jobs to be all over social media. Our
Oh,
attention spans are
yes.
almost nothing today, and you have to be on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. There needs to be so much press and publicity around what you're doing, and for indie devs, that's really hard because you're already stretched thin on your resources.
Yep. And
We all can't just make a commercial and put it out there and get what is it? What was the game that generated like 100 million like opening night? It was it Bethesda's latest title that just came out, or Space Marines or something like that.
yeah, the Warhammer Space Marine 2 one.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
oh my, yeah, they made like 100, like
Yeah.
that's a massive conglomerate that's able to just tackle marketing strategically.
Yeah.
Most indie devs can't do that.
Yeah, and most indie devs don't have that background. That's the again, like to bring this back to like your courses and like teaching foundational stuff. A lot of people get in the game industry. Again, they're thinking about this purely from the artistic side. They're not thinking
Yeah.
about what it's like to do cold emails to YouTubers, influencers. They don't think about putting together a snappy 3 to 5 second GIF of their game.
No,
But
right, exactly. Yeah.
again, like
Well, nonetheless, have a budget to do something with like influencers, right? I don't know if you remember Machine Zone was doing
hmm
influencers for, was it Clash? I think it was their Clash of Clans games
hmm
that were doing influencer marketing. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger was paid like $10 million
oh
to
yes.
just be a part of that project. It was
hmm
nuts.
Yeah. It
Um,
is, again, very hard to do. And again, like we've been talking for almost an hour and a half. I know we're coming up on our time. Like we could stay here for like next 5 hours and regale people with all the horror stories that we've learned. So, I guess to bring this back to kind of like your course and like for more information on that front. So, in terms of length, like how long do your courses normally run?
Yeah, so fortunately for everyone, the courses were designed for busy professionals in mind. So it's completely at your own pace. To
hmm
be successful in it, you need to commit 1 to 2 hours a day. If you do that confidently within about 8 to 12 months, you're looking at a career change. And that's about 1 to 2 hours a day.
hmm
If you can go at it more, it happens a lot quicker. But the programs are kind of at your own pace. We provide you the blueprint for a successful tech career. And
hmm
then we have all the resources to make sure that you're there doing what you need to do. You get one-to-one technical coaching if you're stuck on a problem. You get access to a community. There's 24/7 ticket support monitored by our staff, things like that. And then, of course, you get access to all the alumni and things that go on. So employment events that go on, career coaching, things like that.
Yeah.
But you're typically looking at about, I would say, if you have no experience with this, it could be a 6 to 12 month run of taking it serious, learning this, and recognizing too that it's a skill. You're going to be learning this for the rest of your career, and it's not about how fast you get the job. It's about doing this right, learning and growing, continuously learning and growing. And the job will come with time. I have some students who they put their heart and soul into this. They get hired in 4 months, and then I have some who've been also putting their heart and soul into this, and they get hired in 18 months.
hmm
It's really not about the outcome of getting that job. It's about the outcome of committing and showing up, doing the work, learning and
Yeah.
growing, and doing what you need to do. Just like it's games and marketing for games is an entire industry in itself. Getting a career in tech is an industry in itself. So we have two
Yep.
sides of this. One, I'm going to upskill you to become a game developer and software engineer so you can go build your dream game. But then you have the employment side. For some, communication, interviewing, that comes natural to them. For others, it requires a lot of coaching, a lot of
Yep.
training. Networking. If you are not networking, or if you're someone who is shy and introverted, you're not going to succeed as fast as someone who's an extrovert and someone who can confidently go talk to employers.
Yep.
So when it comes to getting a job, there's a difference between getting a job and learning to code. Learning to code is honestly the easy part of this industry. Getting a job is all about who you know. It's about networking, and it's people. People
Yep.
hire people, and it's about communication. If
Yep.
your communication game isn't as strong as someone who is, they're going to get a job over you every single time. And like it's very tough to evaluate the employment market because it really is one of those things where people hire people. And so I always tell students, like, at the end of the day, anyone can train you to be a better dev, but they can't train you not to be a jerk or have passion and excitement for what you do. So
Yeah.
understanding that, who do you want to hire? Someone who is a great programmer but doesn't communicate well, or someone who maybe has some weak spots in their coding, but this is an excellent person you want to have lunch with.
Yeah, and like speaking of this, from the game dev and the dev space, like I have seen, I'm sure we all have horror stories of that one programmer or that one designer who thinks like they are the absolute god of games. You know, everyone else is wrong and I'm perfect. And
That role doesn't work anymore. That role has been kicked out.
oh, yep, but it's still that kind of challenge of what do you have that you can bring to this table when it comes to game dev? Because I've spoken to teams where it's like, okay, this person, they're the social media guy. You know, we don't touch the Twitter, we don't touch Discord. This person handles all for us, but they don't touch the art.
And the secret here for those watching, my students and everyone else who wants to get into games, especially as a software engineer or game developer, is that you have to take away the guesswork on whether or not you're a software engineer. Before I even talk to you, I need to know that you have the skills that I'm looking for. Because if you can do that, then we will spend 80% of the interview on, are you a culture fit for this organization? Can you communicate well? Can I put you with a cross-disciplinary team? That is the number one thing. Soft skills today are more important across every industry. Your hard skills, I can train anyone to be a developer. But again, it comes down to communication. And the thing that we do with our students is we guide them to creating these career-ready professional portfolio sites, LinkedIn's, GitHub's configured and decked out. Before you even talk to any of my students, you know they're a software engineer. You don't care where they went to school because it shouts experienced engineer. And now we're going to focus on, are you a culture fit here? Because that's the key. Are you going to fit into this company? Do you communicate well? And do I want to work with you? Because if you, and that's the goal, versus someone who, A, I have never talked to you before, and B, I don't actually know if you're a good developer. Now you're going into an interview where you're going to be interrogated versus having a conversation flow. And every single time, if you have an interview where it's just a conversation, similar to how we're talking now, you're going to walk away. You're going to walk away with an opportunity to work there. But if they had to grill you to find out what you know, and then also test your communication abilities, it's much harder. So, and that's the landscape of the tech industry right now. Is I don't know if you have the skill. So what we specialize in is, let me take away that guesswork on whether or not I have the skill, because then we can focus on the career coaching and the communication.
Yep. And again, like for like some of that I do would probably be like the next step. Like, yes, once you have the software engineer skills, now you have to start thinking about things from the consumer standpoint, and that's certainly where my specialty comes in. Again, I have talked to developers, I have played countless video games, I understand what this feels like in someone's hands, and it's all these different skills that you have to learn. And for some people, again, one part of this could be amazingly easy. I have played games from students who very first prototype is phenomenal, like it's an amazing game, but they don't know anything else about the marketing. They don't know anything else about kind of taking it to that next step. And again, I've seen the opposite. I've seen people who have all the marketing, all the social skills. They can talk to you for hours on end, and their game is terrible. That it doesn't feel right. It doesn't work right. And like we've been saying over this entire cast, you need all of this in order for it to work. And that's what makes it so exciting, and it also makes it so damn difficult to succeed.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 17 years to be a part of this industry, watch it evolve. And where it is today, it's more competitive than ever, and you have to not only do you have to kind of be the best, but you have to want to be the best, right? Have passion and excitement for what you do, articulate what you're passionate about, and hopefully that will come across to who you're talking with, and you'll be worth the investment. But yeah, this was great, Josh.
Again, like I can, I was telling John before we started, like I can talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours. Like this is like my bread and butter. This is easy for me as breathing. But I know that it is Halloween, and you have to do some trick or treating soon.
Yeah, so. My 9-month-old. We're going here. My 9-month-old is here. This is Noah, and he is going as the character from Up. I think Russell. He's going as Russell tonight, so my wife is going to be the house, and I'm going to dress up as the old man. So it's going to be. Oh, there you go. My wife's going to put on his outfit. There we go. Boom. So he's Russell with his little hat here. It's going to be awesome. Although now that I think about it, he could have been. I'm blanking on it. Super Smash Bros. The kid with the baseball cap.
Ness.
Ness. That's it. Next year. You're going to be Ness.
All right.
He'll be Ness for next year.
And speaking about Halloween,
yeah,
I got a lot of horror to get to as well, which we only talked about that with your 9-month-old there. But yeah, so if you're free in the future, Don, then we can always do a follow-up cast and talk more about whatever. Like, this is always fun.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll set up a page as well for your followers if they're interested in getting information, and we'll create some links for you and make sure you're taken care of as well.
Yeah.
With that, though, thank you so much for having me on here. It was great to be on here and look forward to being back again.
Yeah, awesome. So to wrap things up, I just have a few quick kind of logistics questions for you about your course, and then we'll say goodnight. So the first thing, for people watching, is there like do you work like on like a schedule, or it's just like if anyone is interested in your course at any time, they can sign up whenever for it?
Yep. Anyone who's interested at any time, you can sign up whenever. You can check us out at gamedevhq.com. We'll create a page, gamedevhq.com/ sorry, I just blanked on it. gamedevhq.com/gameswisdom. And you'll be able to put a link somewhere, and we can have a landing page there where they can get all the information about it.
Awesome.
But it is at your own pace. You can sign up whether it's Monday, the weekend, it doesn't matter. You can talk with our enrollment team and get all your questions answered.
Awesome. And for social media wise, besides Game Dev HQ, anything else you want to promote? Twitter, X, Blue, whatever.
Yeah, all of it's at Game Dev HQ. You can find us everywhere. The best place if you want to connect with myself is going to be on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, you can find me. Just search my name, Jonathan Weinberger. Search Game Dev HQ. You'll find me there.
Awesome. So my final question for you for tonight then is, do you have anything you'd like to say to take us out on, either to my fans, to your students, or everyone?
No, I think this was great for those listening. I hope it inspired you. Hope you got hope you learned something. And for those who are thinking about a career in games, recognize that there's still a great opportunity there. But there's an even bigger opportunity to use gaming as a stepping stone into a larger tech career. And when you're approaching games, recognize that your skill set is not just gaming, and leverage that to work and go beyond gaming, because the world of engineering is pretty damn remarkable. And if you do want to go into games, just recognize that it has its challenges, but it's also still a great career path. And you're going to ultimately, everyone who works in games, they do it because they love it. So no matter what, there's no wrong answer.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I think that will take us out for tonight. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Jonathan. And as I said, if you are free in the future, we can certainly have another conversation.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
All right, not a problem. So for everyone watching, thank you for tuning in. For any of Jonathan's students, if you want to learn more about from the design side of things and hear all about how to take all the skills you learn from Jonathan's course and apply it to whatever genre you like, be sure to check out my stuff here, like and subscribe. Links to all my books where I talk a lot about the design philosophy of many different genres. And if you are a developer watching this and you want to promote an idea or your game, or just talk more about any aspect of game dev, please reach out. You'll find links to Game Dev HQ and all that other great stuff down in the comments below. But with that said, that is going to do it. So while it'll be long past Halloween by the time that you're watching this, I hope you had a great Halloween, and be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you study the art and science of games. So until our next conversation, everyone, have a great rest of your night.